I was talking to a friend of mine at work, and we were talking about his son. He's got sons, I've got sons who are brand new adults, 18, 20, 21 years old. And we were talking about the next step. And I brought up the military. One of the best things that I ever did in my life was go into the Air National Guard. I went through Air Force basic training, Air Force tech school, and then had to do one weekend a month of service. Basic training turned my life around. It was the hardest thing I had ever done up to that point in my life. And when I was done, I felt accomplished. And it was like I'd made it through the fire. And I had this new confidence and also some new skills, just personal skills, self-discipline that I did not have before. So we're talking about that, but everybody always defaults to college. You know, we, over the last 50 years, have conditioned ourselves or have been conditioned to believe that college is the next step after you graduate high school. But so many college degrees don't have jobs directly related to them. If you look at the military, you go into the military, they're going to give you a job and teach you how to do that job that is specifically necessary in the military. But many of those jobs translate into civilian life. If you're going to be an airplane mechanic in the military, you can be an airline mechanic in civilian life. Almost everything in the military will translate. If you want to become an air traffic controller in the Air Force, you can be an air traffic controller in civilian life. All those things translate. But college doesn't translate into jobs necessarily. I mean, if you go to school, let's say you go to school and you get a degree in political science, you know there's no such thing as a political scientist. You can't just go get a job as a political scientist. The best you can hope for is to become a professor of political science. In real life, if you go to school and get a job in political science, the best you can hope for is to become a volunteer on a political campaign. Most of those people end up going to law school to become attorneys, which is another 3 years. And then, of course, once you graduate from law school, do you really have a job? No, you got to go out and find a job. You got to go out there and sell somebody. And then here's the thing. You got to sell somebody on why they should hire you as an attorney. And then once you become an attorney, you got to go out there and sell yourself to clients. But they don't teach you to sell in law school. They probably teach you that you need to sell, but they don't teach you how to sell, because that's the real skill in being an attorney, is knowing how to sell. That's why you see so many big billboards out there for attorneys, because these guys are selling their services. Going to law school does not translate into a job when you graduate. Same thing with engineers. You go to school to become an engineer. When you graduate, now you've got to go out there and sell your engineering services to people. Even if you work for an engineering firm, you're still going to have to go out there, make political connections, because that's where a lot of the big jobs are, and go out there and introduce yourself and sell yourself to people. But they don't teach you how to sell in engineering school. They teach you a lot of stuff. They don't teach you how to sell. And that's the very necessary component of becoming an engineer, is that you got to be able to sell yourself and sell your services. In fact, that's most stuff. But all these people think college first, and they work so hard to get into college, but then once they get out of college, they realize they've got no skills. So how much is a college degree actually worth? I was spending $25,000 a year to go to college. And then when I graduated, I had no skills that translated into a real job. Subsequently, I started learning web development and have been a web developer, internet marketer ever since I graduated. So that's been 25 plus years. But there were no schools teaching that. I was learning the internet on the internet. But now, of course, they are teaching those things, but a lot of what they're teaching is still outdated. In fact, Rick Walsh was a vice president for Darden Restaurants for a long time. He was doing a little speaking engagement, and he said, the day you graduate from college, your degree is already outdated, which is true, because everything that college teaches you is past. It's theory, it's history, it's all in the past. It's not really going to prepare you for the future. One thing that I learned in college was how to learn and that I could learn. Of course, I didn't even know what I wanted when I went to college. And so often, whenever you meet kids in college, they're all in the same boat. Nobody really knows what they want to do. I mean, I've met people who made it all the way through engineering programs, and then when they graduated said, I really want to be a doctor, and then they go back to medical school. College is a very expensive place to find yourself. Harvard is the oldest university in the United States. It was established in 1636. And of course, only rich people went to college back then. Before you could be accepted, you had to know Latin, Hebrew, and Greek. And it was a liberal arts school. They weren't teaching medicine. They weren't teaching engineering. It was just to kind of expand your mind and give you a bigger worldview. It was the next step for culture. Rich people sent their kids there to gain some culture, to meet like-minded people, maybe to make some new business connections, and possibly a way to find a suitable mate, because it was mostly white men going to school there, and they would go there, they'd make friends with a guy, and he had a sister, and so somebody would end up getting married. It was forming political and business bonds. And then, of course, Yale was started later on, and they were kind of competing for the same socioeconomic demographic. So that was 350 years ago. In the 1950s, though, the GI Bill was introduced. And the GI Bill was kind of a reward for those servicemen who went off to war, who are going to come back, didn't have any prospects. So you send these guys to college on the GI Bill, military paid for it all, and then when they graduate, they can work themselves into the workforce at a professional leadership type level. Then the Russians launched Sputnik. Here's the thing. So the space race began in 1957. The GI Bill was already in place. And then the United States did this quick turnaround, said, okay, we need more people going to college now to learn engineering and science because the Russians have launched a rocket into space and they're going to take over space. And so we need to compete with them. And so that was the big push. 1957 became the big push for engineering and science in college. And that was also the first introduction to guaranteed student loans. Guaranteed student loans then became much bigger in the 70s when we started outsourcing and competing with China for cheaper manufacturing. But then by the 1980s, college became this de facto next step in adulthood. You graduate high school and then you go to college. And that was also the first time you started hearing those with college degrees earn more than those without. The media was putting this out to everybody because they wanted everybody to go to college. So everybody did start going to college. The thing is, the statistic that those with college degrees earn more than those without was based on 350 years of history of rich people sending their kids to college. These kids did not need college. They did not go to college to become wealthy. They were already wealthy. They were already going to take over their parents' businesses. They were already the sons and sometimes daughters of titans of industry. They came from money. For 350 years, only rich people sent their kids to college. So of course, those with college degrees earned more than those without. It had been that way for 350 years when in the 1980s, they started putting out that message. But middle class and lower middle class people took that as, I'm going to be rich if I go to college, which was completely false. But because they started putting out that message, more and more people started applying for guaranteed student loans, and new universities started popping up all over the place. And then they started raising their tuition. The cost of living over the next 20 years went up about 17%, maybe 23%. But tuition went up 1,700% over the next 20 years because of guaranteed student loans. colleges and universities could charge whatever they wanted to because the federal government was backing those loans. And everybody was still brainwashed into believing that if they went to college, they were going to be rich because those without college degrees earned less than those with college degrees. The thing is, it was already that way for 350 years, but then it reinforced it and became a self-fulfilling prophecy because now everybody had a college degree. And if you didn't have a college degree, then you were probably brain damaged. You had a learning disability. You had a birth defect, because everybody was going to college. So of course, those with college degrees earned more than those without. Of course they did. And so now we have gotten to the point where if everybody has a college degree, what's a college degree really worth? There were jobs like policemen, firemen, paramedics that didn't require a college degree. You would have to go to the police academy, you'd have to go to the fire academy, but you didn't need a 4-year college degree to be a policeman or fireman. But by year 2000, everybody was requiring it because if you didn't have it, you had mental disability. They went to school for any college degree, sociology, liberal arts, political science, basket weaving, horticulture. I mean, if you're a farmer, do you really need a degree in horticulture? If you grew up on a farm and you've been farming your whole life, what is a degree in horticulture going to do for you? Probably not much. I mean, it might help you a little bit, might help you make some business connections. Is it really worth $25,000 a year? I would say no. Now, there are kids out there, I'm sure, who went to school, got a horticulture degree, and got into the fertilizer business and are selling fertilizer. They probably didn't need the degree to sell fertilizer, but I'm sure they're happy to have it. When I went to college, when I graduated, it did give me some confidence. I always use this analogy. You got 2 poodles. They're from the same litter. One's got the papers, one doesn't. Which is more valuable? Obviously, the one with the papers. So once I graduated college, I had my papers. Were they worth $150,000? I will argue that they weren't. I'll also argue that I probably should not have been the one to go to college. If it were a lot more selective, I never would have gotten into college. The only reason I got into college is because it was free money available to everybody. The problem is it wasn't free money. I still had to pay it back. And that's where the burden comes because you got all these people now with college degrees and they all have to pay that loan back. And they don't make enough money to pay it back because now you've got this mortgage size payment hanging over your head for the next 30 years. So how do you buy a house? You're already paying a mortgage for your education. Now we're seeing it. People are having fewer kids because they can't afford to have kids. People are working 2 jobs just to pay their student loans or keep current on their student loans because now the government's just going to garnish their wages otherwise. So who really benefits? Do the poor people and the middle class people benefit by going to college? No, they didn't. The rich people still benefit. They paid cash for their education. It was no big deal for them. But the poor people now are paying 3 times more for their education because they got loans and they have to pay interest. And that interest never stops accruing. So now for the next 30 years, they've got this hanging over their head. So I always tell people, anybody who will listen, don't go to college unless you know what you're going to college for and that you know college can get you to where you want to go. Otherwise, there's a ton of other options. I mean, we need plumbers, we need electricians, we need linemen, we need aircraft mechanics, we need airplane pilots. There are so many other jobs we need that don't require a college degree that will earn more than those with a college degree. I mean, you're going to go to college, you spend $100,000, $200,000 to get a job that maybe pays you $70,000 when you could just go to learn to be an airline mechanic and graduate making $70,000 in 6 months or a year. I work for a veterinarian and we interview recent graduates from veterinary school. And some of these people will have $350,000 worth of student loans for a job that pays about $150,000. In fact, once they graduate, probably $130,000 a year. And within the next few years, as long as they add more skills like surgery and things like that, they can make $200,000, $250,000. Some can make $300,000 if they're really proactive about learning on the job. But $350,000 hanging over your head, that $350,000 will buy you a nice house in Florida. But when you're paying that for the next 30 years for student loans, what kind of house can you actually buy while you're working? Being a veterinarian is hard work. You're dealing with compassion fatigue all day long. Your job is dealing with sick and dying pets most of the time. It's the real hard stuff that makes the money. But when you've got $350,000 hanging over your head, it's no wonder that there's such a high rate of people quitting the industry or just quitting life in general when you've got that kind of stuff hanging over your head. So I guess my point is, don't go to college unless you know that college can get you where you want to be. And there are so many other options out there that are probably a lot more fun. Yeah, so that's my Saturday morning ramble.